webinar.
Okay, and starting webinar. Good luck, ladies. It's gonna be fun. Starting now.
Okay. Hi, everyone. We are going to wait a few moments while people continue to log on before we start. We're so happy to have you all here this afternoon. So we will just get started in just in a few minutes. We're just going to wait for a few more people to log on as things get underway. Give us a minute or two.
Hello. Hello, everyone from across the country.
So happy to have Canada here, everybody around. Okay, people are starting to log on, which is great. Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to give it about another minute or so. We got lots to get through. So, okay, they're still logging on. Welcome, everyone.
Welcome. Hello.
Oh, we've already got some hellos flowing in, Sarah.
Oh, very nice.
It's nice to see everyone.
I see Elise. Hello. Hello, Ted. Nice to see you. I know that we have a lot of people coming in from Ontario, but also from Quebec and
Alberta.
Coast as well too, in Alberta.
Yeah.
Saskatoon. Oh. Hello, Angela.
Lovely. Oh, they're all starting to come in now. Okay, we'll give it one more minute, guys, and then we'll.
Hi, Amy. She's joining us from Vancouver, where there's the sommelier competition. The Canadian sommelier competition is happening this week out in BC.
In beautiful BC, right, Sarah, where you just got back from?
I did. I just got back from BC, judging the National Wine Awards of Canada.
It looked like a fantastic turnout. Like, wow.
Yes, the largest turnout of Canadian wines in history of Canadian wine competitions, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, it looked like a lot of fun. Okay, you know what? I think it's 2 minutes after 2, so people will continue to log on, but you know what? Let's get underway and kick off this afternoon. So good afternoon, everyone. We hope everyone is enjoying this beautiful autumn weather. So ladies in California, it's like California here. It's sunny, it's warm, it's magnificent. And we hope everyone's drinking some great wine to usher in the fall season. My name is Paula Aruskovich. I'm the communications director for California Wines in Canada. And on behalf of us here, Dan Giroux, Celeste Finn, and myself, we'd like to welcome everyone back to our fall edition of our California Wines Somm Sessions. Today, we're featuring the amazing wines and vineyard personalities from Cakebread Cellars, St. Francis Winery, and Sequoia Grove. Stephanie Jacobson, Kate Madigan, and Molly Hill represent the new generation of female winemakers making an impact in the Napa and Sonoma valleys. Stephanie will be tasting us through her 2019 Cakebread Cellars flagship Chardonnay, Katie, her 2018 St. Francis Old Vine Zin, and Molly for a sampling of Sequoia Grove's fine 2018 Cabernet Sauvignon. These three knowledgeable vintners will discuss how these properties' unique terroirs influence the expressions of these varietals. Moderating the discussion will be our dear friend and supporter, sommelier and wine writer, Sara D'Amato, who will provide additional insights throughout our session. We'd also like to give special thanks to our friend Howard Kamen, the team from Charton Hobbs, and Kate, Stephanie, and Molly for being such great partners to work with and for all of their hard work behind the scenes. But before I turn it over to Sarah and the team to get started, just wanted to share a few housekeeping items with you. As attendees, you'll all be muted for the duration of the webinar. However, you will see on your screen that there are 2 channels for you to communicate with other attendees and pose questions to the panelists. First is the chat section. The chat section is an informal way for you to communicate with other guests, but just please be sure to select everyone, all panelists and attendees in the to field, as it tends to default to panelists only. Second, in the Q&A section, this is where you get to ask any questions, so please submit your questions to the panel during the webinar there. If you find yourself with streaming issues, you may want to encourage other members of your office or household to log off the internet and avoid simultaneous streaming to save bandwidth. And you may also want to log out and try again with another internet server such as Firefox or Chrome. This webinar is being recorded. All of you will receive a link to the video recording and tasting notes in the following days. So settle back in. You're all in for a great treat today. Let's get started. We're going to escape to California wine country for the next hour or so. So I'm going to turn it over to you now, Sarah, and our star vintners to kick off and start the conversation. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the hour.
And thank you to you, Paula. And welcome to all of the somms and writers in trade that are joining us today. I know a lot of you coming on here, but for those of you who I don't, my name is Sara D'Amato. I'm a critic and principal partner at Wine Align, WSET instructor, podcaster for Wine Thieves with my colleague, John Sabo. We're in the midst of actually doing a great series on California wines, in particular Napa Valley. I work with the Somm Trade, formerly as the president of CAPS Ontario, and now the board of BUSA, the Best Somm USA competition. And today I have the opportunity to discuss some globally recognized wines with some of California's top winemakers who just all happen to be women, I'm proud to say. So I'd like to thank all of them for joining us during this busy harvest season, although they've all told me that harvest is just over. So congratulations to all of you for a really busy season. And now all of this hard work begins and with vinification. So with us we have, as Paula mentioned, Stephanie Jacobs of Cakebread Cellars, Katie Madigan of St. Francis, and Molly Hill of Sequoia Grove. So welcome, ladies. Now, first up, I'm going to pass the floor over to Stephanie Jacobs. Now, Stephanie was appointed Cakebread Cellars winemaker back in 2017, and she's one of the 4 winemakers in the winery's history over the past 5 decades. She's a graduate of UC Davis, and she's worked in the Sierra foothills and then at the Bogle Vineyards before joining this enology team at Cakebread in 2004. She's got a soft spot for Pinot Noir, but today we're going to be tasting Pinot's Burgundian counterpart, Chardonnay. So Stephanie, welcome. I'm going to leave it to you now to introduce Cakebread Cellars.
Great. Well, good morning, or good afternoon rather, which I think most of you are probably enjoying a nice afternoon. Welcome to our virtual cellar in the background, or virtual winery. In the background, I have our white tank fermentation room. So I may have paid or not paid somebody to perform some cellar theatrics in the background, so look closely. Welcome to Cakebread Cellars. We are family owned and operated, founded by Jack and Dolores Cakebread in 1972. 1973 was our first production. We did a Chardonnay from Napa Valley, where Jack Cakebread was our winemaker. Let's see, I'm now the director of winemaking. I've been here for about 18 years and worked very closely with the 4 winemakers, Jack, Bruce Cakebread, which is Jack and Dolores' son, and Julian Lax. And then I took over for Julian Lax at the end of 2017. We manage 16 estate vineyards, just about 600 planted acres throughout Napa Valley and Anderson Valley and Mendocino. We focus on food-friendly wines with balanced ripeness and its natural acidity. I'm here to talk about our Chardonnay. So if you want to go to the next slide. There's our cellar, and here's our vineyards. You can see the egg room. We have 13 concrete eggs in what we call our egg hall, our new visitor center, and multiple different tasting rooms. So we'd love to have you come and actually be in the winery instead of doing a virtual tasting. So we're looking forward to that in the future. You'll have to come visit us. Next slide. Okay, Napa Valley Chardonnay. This is our flagship wine, as previously mentioned. We have 4 estate vineyards in Carneros, the southern end of the Napa Valley. It's highlighted down there in red. We have our Foster Road vineyard, our Cuttings Wharf Road, and Tinsley Ranch, and our Milton vineyard. They all kind of sit along a ridge that's elevated in the Napa Carneros area. So the soil is a little bit loamier than the typical clay soil that you think of in Carneros, which gives the wine a nice concentration of fruit aromas and nice natural acidity. We hand pick at night, which I don't think is typically new anymore to winemaking, or especially Chardonnay. We whole cluster press to retain all the fresh fruit aromas and flavors and natural acidity, to limit oxidation and phenolic extraction from the skins. The juice is cold settled overnight for about 36 hours, a little bit more than overnight, to let the solid settle out. And then we rack the juice off of the solids into another tank. Typically, we will inoculate with commercial yeast. Sometimes we do things native in some of the estate vineyards. And then we do 100% barrel fermentation with our Chardonnay. So once it's in barrels, it stays in barrels until we're ready to bottle. We do a little bit of malolactic, depending on the vintage, it may change the percentage. I'm just looking to kind of soften the acidity a little bit, take the edge off. So this particular wine is 13% malolactic fermentation, which means that I inoculated 13% with malolactic bacteria. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that it went all the way through malolactic fermentation. So as it's going through malolactic fermentation, I'm constantly tasting and looking for that right balance of acidity and flavors. And then we'll go ahead and stop the fermentation, finish barrel aging. Everything stays on its original yeast lees. We do stir to add some of that complexity and creaminess to the body of the wine. We age in French oak barrels for 8 months, and it stays there until we're ready to bottle. So then we'll pull everything out, blend it together, and go through the bottling process in the summer.
Stephanie, this is a wonderfully refreshing Chardonnay. Has your view on malolactic fermentation and the percentage it undergoes changed? Has it changed over time, or based on vintage?
It's definitely based on vintage. I'm not looking for the butteriness or diacetyl character that can come with malolactic fermentation. We really are just looking to take the edge off the acidity and just add a little bit of complexity and layers to the wine.
And another question for you about the source, Stephanie. You showed us that great map of the vineyards, and you know, Cakebread certainly has vineyards in many different very important sub-appellations throughout the region. But Cakebread was also the second winery to achieve the Napa Green certification. That was way back in 2008, and you've committed to quite a bit to sustainable production. As an organic vineyard, you're bee-friendly certified, fish-friendly. You've got an eco-friendly visitor center, of which we saw a bit of it there. I'm curious about the sustainable certification and your view on sustainability and organics. Are you transitioning in some sites, and where you see the Napa Green certification going?
Yes, we are very committed to sustainability. I think it's our responsibility to preserve the land for future generations. We continuously done more and more as far as sustainability. You can always improve. I think there's always something to learn. We just joined the International Winery for Climate Action. There we go. Just this month. So we're going through that process. It's a group of wineries that are committed to reducing their carbon footprint using science-based methods. So we're going through the entire winery as well as the vineyards to look to see how we can reduce the carbon footprint, and that's where we're going in the future.
Excellent. Well, I'm always happy to hear that. And you know, a little bit more just about the plantings. You've been a bit avant-garde in terms of sustainability. Way back in the 80s, I believe, in the early 80s, did you start using drip irrigation? Is that correct? I mean, started probing and using water more efficiently?
I'm not exactly sure what year we started drip irrigation. We have been on drip irrigation since I started I do know that. There are some places where we're a little bit more dry farms, which has been very helpful, especially the last couple of years due to the drought. But yes, we do drip irrigation. We also have a lot of new technology has come through with new sensors so that we can precision irrigate, so that we are not overwatering or underwatering, and we're just giving the right amount of water that the vines need to produce, ripe fruit with really nice flavors and aromas.
Excellent. Well, I think it's showing in this wine that there's this terrific balance. I'd also like to address all of you who are listening. If you have any questions for any of our vintners, please feel free to add them to the chat. We'll also have them all together if we have some time at the end, and you can, if you have any questions remaining at the end, we'll make sure to discuss with our vintners. Well, thank you very much, Stephanie, for taking us through Cakebread's Napa Valley Chardonnay, as well as some of its history. And so now I'm going to turn the table over to Katie Madigan of St. Francis. And Katie has been with St. Francis winery production team since 2002, starting as a harvest intern after a degree in chemistry from UC Santa Barbara. She became winemaker in 2011 after having studied enology and viticulture at UC Davis. She's highly decorated, including having been given or awarded the Best Woman Winemaker by the International Women's Wine Competition. She also won Zinfandel Producer of the Year in 2014 and 15 at the California Zinfandel Championship. So I'm looking forward to talking to her about Zinfandel. So Katie, St. Francis obviously saw potential in you early on, and it seems like the winery's investment in you has really paid off. You've been producing these beautiful wines that are very expressive of both the vintage and the terroir. So I'm really curious to taste this Old Vine Zin with you from the Sonoma and hear your thoughts on what makes this Zinfandel capable of expressing a sense of place. But I guess let's hear about St. Francis first.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi to everybody that I can't see. I'm so happy to be here today. Thank you for inviting me. I'm sure so many of you are familiar with the St. Francis brand, and I'm really excited to dive a little bit deeper into St. Francis itself, and also our passion for Zinfandel being one of the wines that's giving us the most notoriety over the last couple of decades. But of course, we need to talk about a little bit about where we have been to talk about where we are now. And I absolutely love this picture that you're seeing. This is when we first started planting grapes in 1971. Joe Martin, who you see there with the hat, the taller man, is standing next to Lou Beeler. That was his family's property. And Joe really thought that this little town in Northern California called Kenwood reminded him of Pomerol in France. And so he thought, well, I'll just do what they're doing. And he planted some of the first Merlot in Sonoma County right on this very spot. And after many accolades selling grapes to other wineries, he thought, well, let's try our hand at actually producing our own wine and see where that gets us. So 8 years later, in 1979, we built our own winery and produced our first vintage of St. Francis Merlot. And we're actually just celebrating 50 years of farming in Sonoma County. And that's something really exciting that we're on a short list, certainly with our partners over there in Napa today, that have this rich history in California. If you could please go to the next slide. I think this map is really important as well. I know that when people hear and talk about both Sonoma County and Napa Valley, Napa County, there maybe is not a sense of exactly where the grapes are coming from and how all these different locations really do impact the varietals that you're creating. This map is just Sonoma County. It's about 1,700 square miles, but as you can see, there's all these different appellations that we have set apart from each other. And that's because they're each showing unique characteristics for certain varieties. St. Francis as well, we have expanded past that little star at the bottom of Beeler to grow more grapes and acquire more estate locations in Sonoma County as well. Right above Beeler's, the Wild Oak Vineyard, that is the physical location of our winery. And we also have 150 acres planted there. And then as you look to northern Sonoma County, you see Lago Marcino, which we have owned and operated for over 30 years. And our newly acquired Rio Este, directly to the southwest of it. This is a small plot of land. If you're not familiar with Spanish, it's literally to the east of the river. And this is a very, very fun, unique location in the Russian River, because while most people think of Russian River as a cooler location, this actually has warmer nighttime temperatures. So the varietals that we decided to grow are pretty diverse. We definitely have Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. They have an affinity for those cooler temperatures, but we also put Cabernet and our first ever St. Francis planted Zinfandel. And I think that's why it's important for me to touch on these estate vineyards now growing to over 500 acres that we have control of ourselves. And then these other appellations that you see, while I've made Zinfandel from most of them, I do single out a handful of appellations that I think grows the best Zinfandel in Sonoma County and also produces the most unique flavor characteristics. You could go to the next slide, Howard. Thank you. Same picture as my background. This is an old vine out in Dry Creek Valley, one of the most well-known places to grow Zinfandel in Sonoma. This vineyard is pushing 100 years old. And this is kind of what happens, the way that it has been pruned and trained throughout the years. It just kind of grows up instead of out. There's no trellising on many of these vineyards, although you will see some metal stakes. That's mostly to keep them from falling over, to be honest. And while this particular vineyard is not irrigated, I really enjoy what Stephanie had kind of touched on, that more and more you're seeing some of these really old vineyards have some drip irrigation, because you really do want the longevity of your vineyards to last, decades and hopefully even more centuries like this one has. And if you think of the concept of sustainability, you really can't be sustainable if you're not pushing for the longevity of your land and your agriculture that's on that land. Next slide, please. And finally, the Old Vine Zinfandel. It's such a fun wine for me to make, because I do get to kind of pull from all these unique appellations in Sonoma County, but I wouldn't say that it's easy. You really have to take the time and understand the microclimate that Zinfandel is coming from in order to make it an enjoyable wine. And I would say that part of my focus with Zinfandel is really producing a beautiful, rich color, a medium-bodied wine, but really keeping those tannins in check. And, to get a little geeky about it, you can, manipulate your extraction during active fermentation. And the same amount of tannins that I think are beautiful and lovely for Zinfandel, you know, Molly might think that is way too light for her Cabernets, or, you know, Cakebread may think that's way overdone for any kind of Pinot Noir. So, you know, looking at those kind of characteristics of wine is something that makes it really fun for me year in and year out. When tasting the Old Vine Zin, I always like to tell people that I hope the aroma really allures you. Lots of big fruit, cobblers, maybe some light vanilla in the background. But then on the palate, it's much more traditional. There's a spiciness, a peppery quality, and again, keeping that silky mouthfeel with moderate tannins and balanced acidity. I always feel that wines, red or white, should have a decent amount of acidity in there to really kind of keep you going back for another sip. And those are just some of the things that I really enjoy when I'm making Old Vine Zin.
Thank you, Katie. Your enthusiasm for this varietal has given me a lot of questions to ask you about. I'm curious, just to start off, those 100-year-old, you know, these heritage vineyards that you were showing us here of the Old Vine Zinfandel. What kind of yields are you getting in those vines?
You know, it's really surprising. I think this has to really do with the site and the location and how people are taking care of these old vine heritage vineyards. Some are definitely extremely low. We're looking at 1 to 2 tons per acre. But I actually do have a handful of century-old vineyards that are producing more around 4 tons an acre. It's pretty impressive.
Wow. That is certainly impressive to, you know, that you get that variation. I've always found that sometimes Zinfandel has this kind of uneven bunch ripening at times. Do you see that as much in the old vines, or is that sort of remedied by the fact that everything is ripening uniformly in that scenario?
Oh yes, it's just a given that you can approximate the maturity of Zinfandel clusters, but you never really get 100% of what you may get with other varietals. And I think that's why we have, you know, our sugar range that we like to pick at is probably a little bit wider than you will see with a lot of other varieties, because I could sample today and get 24 bricks and it could come in at 23. It could come in at 26. You have to take that idea with you that there's going to be some uneven ripening on those clusters.
Right. So because I noticed in this particular wine, you're getting a surprising amount of freshness for the alcohol, the ABV percentage here too. And it doesn't feel heavy despite that, which is surprising. And I guess also given your oak treatment and your delicate oak treatment using French oak here, and I'm assuming not all new.
Yes, we use about 25% new, but I think it is interesting to touch on as well that I tend to go for medium toasted barrels instead of medium plus, because I do want the wine to show through and be kind of the star. And I really think that oak, especially with Zinfandel, should be more in the background and adding texture, not really overtly in the aromas and flavors.
Right. Well, it's certainly very delicate. We have a question for you from Ted. Ted actually is asking about St. Francis' story behind the bell in its bell tower.
Oh my gosh.
Care to elaborate on that, Katie?
Yes, I would love to. Our founder, Joe Martin, St. Francis of Assisi was his favorite patron saint. And so when he started the winery in 1979, he actually went to Assisi, Italy, and had the bell custom made for him by the same family that has made the bells for the popes for the last 200 years. It probably costs more to ship it from Italy to Sonoma, but it rings every hour on the hour, and it's a very nice reminder of Joe and our heritage at St. Francis.
Oh, that's it. That is pretty exciting. So next time I come, I'll have to look up, I'll know this, how far it goes back and dates back. Wow, that's really interesting. Well, thank you very much. Kate, we're going to bring you back again at the end to talk a little bit more about more general questions involving Sonoma. But for now here, we're going to, we're going to pass the floor over to Molly Hill from Sequoia Grove. Molly, you joined Sequoia Grove as winemaker in 2003. And I know you're also, along with your counterparts here today, really committed to sustainable farming practices, which include, minimal intervention in the vineyard as well as in the winery. Molly, you strike me as a very forward-thinking winemaker, and I look very much forward to hearing what you have to say regarding the kind of legacy and the future of some of these sites in which you're working with. But let us first have you introduce Sequoia Grove.
Hi, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are in the country. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to talk about Sequoia Grove. Much of my career, like you mentioned, Sarah, has been here. And if you could go back to the first slide, please, for a minute. Much of my career has been here at Sequoia Grove, where we're known for our Cabernet Sauvignons. That's the main thing that we make here. The Sequoia Grove property, and the reason why we make Cabernet Sauvignon is because we are in the heart of Napa Valley in Rutherford. The original Sequoia Grove estate is part of the original Rancho Camus land grant that encompassed much of the Napa Valley, and has since split off into smaller properties, two of which are now our estate properties located in Rutherford. The area of Napa Valley was really a rich agricultural region, and not only growing grapes, but other plums and walnuts as well. What this first slide is, and why I wanted to focus on it, it is showcasing the back of our historic barn on the property. Now in California, over 100 years old for a building is pretty old. So this historic barn was on the property, and going back to the agricultural heritage, it used to house hens when it was more of agricultural roots on the property. When Sequoia Grove was founded in 1978, that barn on the property was the place where all of the wines were made. We've since expanded a little bit farther and just recently completed production of a state-of-the-art fermentation facility. But the other thing I wanted to point out on this slide is really why we focus on Cabernet Sauvignon is the terroir, where the grapes are grown. And you can see through the sequoia trees, through the grapevines there in the background, the Mayacamas mountain range. Napa Valley has Mayacamas on the west and the Vaca mountain range on the east. And those two mountain ranges really form the flavor profile of our Cabernet Sauvignons. Next slide, please. Here is the other side of our historic barn, and you can see the climate, not only the mountain range, but the climate is really crucial to growing quality grapes and quality wine year in and year out. I like to say that the environment that makes it enjoyable for a human is also the environment that makes it enjoyable for a grapevine and grows great wines. You can see there's not a cloud in the sky there. And that lack of rain during the growing season is really key to producing rich, full-bodied Cabernet Sauvignons. That, and we get up into the 90s during the growing season, and that's crucial to soften the tannins and give us that lush, rich flavor profile that we enjoy in Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignons. Next slide, please. And through the wonders of Zoom, this is what I really enjoy, is this bird's eye view map, because we can really understand the terroir, sometimes even better than than being there by getting this bird's eye view. So let me orient you. This is looking over the Rutherford appellation in the heart of Napa Valley. And that location, like I mentioned, is really crucial to the flavor profile of our wines. We have the Napa Valley River running through the center, a little bit of an S running through the center of the screen. Again, to the left, my left, on the west is the Mayacamas mountain range. On the east is the drier Vaca mountain range. And this is an overview of our 2 estate properties in Rutherford. The original estate is about 15 planted acres. And then our newer estate is called Tonella, also in Rutherford. It's closer to the Vaca mountain range and it's 50 planted acres. So those 2 estate vineyards make up the bulk of our Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon wine. And let me talk a little bit more about the Sequoia Grove estate property, because even though they're only about a mile from each other as the crow flies, they're a little bit different on the flavor profile. The original Sequoia Grove estate property is much more influenced by the Mayacamas, so it's a little bit cooler. The alluvial soils that wash down from the Mayacamas to the Napa Valley River make this beautiful alluvial fan. And that alluvial fan is really key for growing grapes. And what it allows is really even growth from one end of a grapevine or of a vineyard to the middle of the vineyard to the other end. That consistent soil profile that the alluvial fan allows is really key to have even grape ripening. And then we have bale, clay, loam soil on the estate property. So that complex minerals that wash through that alluvial fan is also really key for our terroir. Going to the other side of the valley on the Tonella estate property, it's a little bit rockier. It's more volcanic in influence, a little bit drier because you can see there's less soil profile, less trees on the Vaca side, and also reaches the sun first. The Tonella has a little bit more sun exposure than the original Sequoia Grove estate. But together, they really make up a backbone of our Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon, giving flavors of cocoa powder and red cherry, which are classic Rutherford Cabernet Sauvignon flavor profiles. Next slide, please. So we are located, I like to say, on the Rodeo Drive of Napa Valley, right there on Highway 29. This is a side view. You can see the Sequoia Grove estate property located right next to Cakebread Cellars. So both located on the Rodeo Drive of Napa Valley, Highway 29. And then you can see also highlighted the Tonella estate property, like I talked about in the distance there. The different colors, squares, highlight the different varietals planted on the estate properties. The green indicates Cabernet Sauvignon. So you can see that much of our blend, like the wine is named as Cabernet Sauvignon, but we really believe that a complete complex Cabernet Sauvignon has other varietals blended in, other Bordeaux varietals such as Cabernet Franc, Merlot, Petit Verdot, and Malbec. So on the original Sequoia Grove estate property, we have all 5 Bordeaux varietals. And then on the Tonella estate property, we have Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Merlot. So like I mentioned, those go in and really help form a complete, fully developed Cabernet Sauvignon wine in the finished blend. Next slide, please. Like Sara mentioned, the focus on growing the grapes is really where we actually make the wine. So the focus on vineyards is really key to high quality winemaking. This again is the Tonella Estate property looking back at the Mayacamas mountain range. We farm each vine, which is really crucial to making sure that the vines are in balance so that we get even ripening. We're lucky with Cabernet Sauvignon that really even ripening of the cluster is really what we're looking for, as opposed to Katie mentioning the challenges with Zinfandel. We really want fully ripened tannin profile and brown seeds, just a very full-bodied flavor profile in the ripe Cabernet Sauvignon grapes. And that's really crucial to really pay attention in the vineyard to get that in the end. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that our Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon is made up of mostly of our two estate vineyards in Rutherford. However, the full terroir of this wine is the full expression of Napa Valley. So we really want the components from some of the premier AVAs in Napa Valley to be highlighted. So although the bulk is Rutherford, which again is that cocoa powder red cherry, we do source from some other vineyards throughout Napa Valley. We make here at the winery some single vineyard Cabernet Sauvignons. These wines are 3 times the price of our Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon. They go into a single vineyard program, but what doesn't make it into those single vineyard programs from these vineyards highlighted here go in to make up the remainder of the percentage wine in our Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon. So I'll quickly go through some of the flavor profiles that you can find from these vineyards. So Calistoga up in the north of Napa Valley brings this chocolate covered cherry component. St. Helena is more red cherry, more fresh cherry. I mentioned Rutherford. Oak Knoll brings in a little more black licorice and pepper. Going over to Howell Mountain, that brings this beautiful sweet blackberry fruit. And then Atlas Peak Vineyards bring in a blackberry and graphite flavor profile. And then on the south part of Napa Valley, the cooler Coombsville AVA brings in this really beautiful blueberry. So all of those components you can find in our Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon. Next slide, please. And there it is. There's a picture of the bottle. And really, I've been here since 2003. And what really excites me every year of making wine is this intense commitment to quality. So year after year, we look at what we can do to improve the terroir expression and the flavor profile of our Cabernet Sauvignon. And what we decided with this vintage, which is a very special vintage, I need to mention, because this is the first vintage produced in our new state-of-the-art winemaking facility. So it's a vintage that's very near and dear to our hearts here at Sequoia Grove. But back to one of the newest improvements and developments for this wine. We really, because of the sourcing that I mentioned for our Cabernet Sauvignon, we really thought that this wine needed to be aged in 50% new French oak. And our profile, our thinking on oak is similar to Katie's, and that we really look to oak to evolve the palate, so that when our customers pop the cork, the flavor profile that they're getting is this really complete, luscious, long finish flavor profile. It's not for the smoky, oaky, charred components of oak. So it's really to evolve and give a little bit of length and lusciousness to the palate. So we took this wine to 50% new French oak in 2018. And there you can see with the percentage that oak combined with the different Bordeaux varietals in there really go to give this really complete Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon in a glass. And I also, our guiding principle for some of the greatest wines in the world, which is what we measure ourselves on our quality commitment, is balance. So all of the components of a red wine, oak, acid, alcohol, fruit, and tannin, all of those components in balance, so that when the wine is experienced on your palate, it's a beautiful bell curve made up of all of those components. And that 50% new French oak allows us to do that. That combined with the terroir, so really highlighting that sense of place, that flavor profile that is like nowhere else in the world, is really our guiding principles for making Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa Valley.
Well, Molly, I definitely appreciate that balance in this wine. And despite its youthful character, it's still very well in balance. When do you see being, or when do you predict, if you could take out your crystal ball, kind of the best expression of this Cabernet Sauvignon to be? How long is it best to wait for somms to keep this in their cellar?
Yeah, great question. I think the third thing that I neglected to mention was the greatest wines of the world are wines that can age. Now with this Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon, we need to have this dance, right? This dance of it being delicious and enjoyable if a customer buys it in a restaurant to have with dinner that night. And this dance of being one of the greatest wines in the world, which I believe are wines that can age. So our wines can age easily 10 years. But we have something very enjoyable. You can get that terroir and that flavor profile in the glass pretty quickly and pretty easily once the cork is popped. So, you know, these wines, I think, enjoy a bit of age. So, you know, at least a year if you can. I know that's not always possible.
Well, definitely. I think that for sure that this is a wine that showcases that ability to age, especially in its tannic presence, which isn't drying, it's ripe, but it still gives so much grip and length to the wine. So I have a question for you, Molly, regarding the terroir. And you showed us those great maps here and talked about Rutherford and the fact that it does have, you know, a rather complex terroir, but perhaps what it's best known for is that alluvial fan. And that alluvial fan actually runs right from Oakville to Rutherford. So my question is, what are some of the distinguishing features between a Cabernet or a blend like this from Oakville versus one from Rutherford?
Yeah, I think I didn't go into too much detail, but Rutherford is the widest point of the Napa Valley. So I touched on it when we talked about our estate Tonella vineyard, that it's the first to get the sun in the morning. And that being the widest part, and it starts to narrow down by Oakville and continues to narrow until it branches out in Carneros by the bay, by the San Pablo Bay. Being that widest point in Rutherford, you have the maximum amount of sun as it goes across the sky. So that sun allows that ripening of Cabernet Sauvignon that we talked about being necessary for that softening of those tannins. And Rutherford, also being the widest place, has the widest alluvial fan washing out to the river. So I think that's what differentiates it from Oakville, although great wines made in Oakville as well.
Right. But you mentioned that tannic element. I mean, I'm thinking what comes to mind is Rutherford dust and the idea of that type of tannic presence. Is there a particularity to the tannins of wines made from Rutherford?
I know. How could I not say Rutherford dust? I think that a little bit gravelly, I call it cocoa powder combined with red cherry. I think that combination to me is Rutherford dust, sometimes pencil lead. But it's kind of, you can imagine that combination and then that sensation of tannins on your palate. I think that that profile is also unique to Rutherford.
Yeah, most definitely. And you can feel that almost Bordelaise character in these tannins. Well, thank you very much, Molly. And we have about 10 minutes left. We've got some questions coming in for all of you. So here's a question here for each of the trio. Is there some element of their winemaking style, taste preference that influences the profile of these particular wines compared to the style of their predecessors? So I guess what he'd like to know is, are you making wines that you would like to drink? Is that at all a factor? And I hear Kate, I see Katie smiling here, so maybe you can be the first to answer that question. Does that influence your winemaking style, something that you'd like to drink?
Sure. I mean, I think it is kind of a balance. I listen very intently to what the customers say, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are supporting us. And so you will see the trends of your varietals kind of shift back and forth to certain styles. I would say that I'm open to making different styles other than what I personally like. I think there's a couple styles that I am not willing to make. So it's more about stuff I don't care to make. But in terms of what the customer wants, I'm open, and sometimes I kind of like that challenge to make a wine in a certain style.
Right, exactly. So, it's not just you, it's thinking of what the customers like too. Stephanie, how do you feel about that? Is this the Chardonnay that, this is obviously the Chardonnay that you would like to drink? I think this is also a wine lover's Chardonnay. I have to say that. I mean, those of us who enjoy drinking wines and a little bit fresher and more expression of the grape would really enjoy this particular Chardonnay. But is that what you're going for as well?
Absolutely. Going back to when Jack and Dolores started the winery, their sole purpose was to make wine that they love to drink. And it just happens to be that, I work for a company that my style, my preferences align with their styles as well. So that's a great bonus, and probably why I've been here for so long. Being only 4 winemakers here, we've all worked so closely together. Julianne worked with Jack and Bruce for so many years, over 30 years, and I worked with Julianne and Bruce for the last 18. So there's definitely a common thread in the wine styles over the years. And especially the Chardonnay, it's always been about the fruit, showcasing the fruit, the acidity, and how it will go well with food. And so I love making this wine, and of course, pairing it with food and enjoying wine with food is definitely the whole package.
Right, exactly. And speaking of food pairing, we have a couple of food pairing questions. So perhaps I can start off with you, Stephanie. This Chardonnay, what are you craving by drinking the Chardonnay?
Well, I think it goes with a lot of different things. What comes to mind right now is probably some kind of fresh pasta with a nice little lemon sauce, olive oil sauce. I think that the fat goes really well with the acidity, and there's not a lot of butter characters in the wine that will go really well with that type of a sauce.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. Well, ladies, I also wanted to, before we leave, just talk a little bit more about some of the environmental practices that you are involved in, because there's so many to sift through in California, between the preservation of the forest preservation to fish to Napa green certification here. I just wanted to hear once more about, with Katie, in perspective with Katie, some of the elements that you're working with, because I noticed you're working with several of these conservation types of priorities. What is something that we might not know about, or is new that you've decided to take on?
Well, we are certified sustainable, and I think maybe what a lot of people may not realize about sustainability is that it goes beyond the land, which is, first and foremost in our minds, but it kind of transcends into the winery, where our water conservation is at a very high level, even during harvest. but also one step further that the company is really passionate about, and the family that owns St. Francis is really passionate about, is called social equity. And that's treating everybody the same. So employees at St. Francis have the same benefit package from, person that's been there for 6 months to the person that's been there for 20 years. And I think choosing to put focus on your employees is just as important to making a sustainable business as it is to looking at sustainable land.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm glad you mentioned that piece of the puzzle, because it's something that is kind of unique to sustainability as opposed to some of the other certifications. So I appreciate you saying that, and really also enjoyed learning about the Baylor Vineyard a little bit more, and the Wild Oak, and as well as the Rio Este Vineyard. A lot of complexity drawn from those sites. So thank you very much. And I see Paula has come on, and I believe she has some closing notes.
Thank you, Sarah. Just before we wrap up, we did have a couple of questions, or a request actually, for pricing. And I think, Howard, if you want to just end on that note, there you go. A couple of people in the audience were asking for approximate prices, understanding that prices differ for province. So there you go. And really, I want to thank you, Sarah, for a great discussion with these three fabulous women who are making their own mark in Napa and Sonoma. Stephanie, Molly, and Keith, thank you so much for just a terrific afternoon. I think we could have spent a lot more time learning and listening to you, but unfortunately we do have an hour, and I know how busy you ladies are getting back to the winery since harvest just wrapped up, and you said it was all a terrific harvest with yields were down, but very concentrated, very flavorful. And that's wonderful to hear. We love hearing an uneventful harvest with just great weather, and you guys, that's all you had to worry about, which is fantastic. So it was just great to hear that. I want to thank you in the audience for joining us this afternoon. It was a great way to spend an hour together, and we hope to see you. We'll keep you posted on the next Somm session that will be coming up in the next few months, and stay tuned for the recording and the winemaker notes that will be coming your way over the next couple of days. So thanks again, everyone. Have a great afternoon, and thank you to a tremendous team for showing us through Napa and Sonoma this afternoon. So good afternoon, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.